Hello and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. In this one, there's a major update as Russians continue offensive operations all across the front line. The Russians have managed to push further across the river line, in the Oskil River line near Kupiansk, in the direction of Toretsk. They've managed to advance to the south, capturing the settlement of Losova. The Ukrainians managed to counterattack and regain some positions south of Kupiansk. The Russians managed to push further and gain control over a district of Toretsk here in the southern direction. The Russians also managed to advance slightly in the direction of Pokrovsk, mainly in the direction of Kurakhove, where they've managed to advance within the apartment complex area. They've advanced to the north of Novyi in the direction of Novyi Komar, and in the south, the Russians have advanced in the direction north of Nesteryanka, a settlement south of Oryhiv. The Russians have also managed to advance in the Kursk region where they continue their offensive operations. Starting out, we will actually not start from any of the sides, but in the direction of Novyi Komar, because that is where the most interesting news are from. The Russians have managed to regain control over the fortified positions and push into Novyi Komar again. The question is, how does the Russians continuously launch these offensive operations that allows them to gain a foothold within a settlement and usually also capture the entirety of it? Sometimes the Ukrainians successfully counterattack to regain positions like Novyi Komar, but the Russians continuously are able to gain a foothold within the settlement. The Ukrainians have ATGMs, they have drone operators, they have artillery, they have minefields. How is all of that bypassed? Well, the deep state map gives an answer to that exactly. There's this image that deep state map released, which is an image from drone operators showing a column of Russian vehicles. There's a column of 10 vehicles, 1 tank, and 9 infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers. The tank in the front is a modernized version of the Turtle tank. The way it is built is heavily fortified, it has electronic warfare, it has mine clearing equipment. So what it does is that it clears the way for the entire column. With electronic warfare, the drones have a more difficult time actually destroying any of these vehicles. If it targets the tank itself, the tank is heavily fortified, so it doesn't break easily. If it targets the rest of the vehicles, then the electronic warfare will continuously interfere, so they have to target the tank first. So this allows the Russians to clear the mines with the tank in the front. It allows them to deal with the drones, with the electronic warfare, and it is heavily fortified, which allows it to bypass the defenses of the Ukrainians. And then with 9 vehicles behind it, they're able to drop up to an entire platoon within the settlement, which allows the Russians to have a lot of manpower at the front line and establish control over a settlement. It is likely that the initial push towards Novyi Komar was apprehended by Ukrainian reinforcements arriving, but now that the Russians have dealt with those with artillery, FAB bombs, and long-range weaponry, they launched yet another push into Novyi Komar, and they are looking to gain full control of the settlement. It is going to be interesting to see how the Ukrainians will deal with this. They'll have to do more risky maneuvers, like sending tanks to the front line to deal with this. However, again, that is just simply a risky maneuver, as it will be within range of Russian artillery, FAB bombs, and so on, which can simply destroy these vehicles from afar. The Russians also have their own drones to operate, which covers their offensive operations. Now, moving to the south to have some chronology in this, the Russians have managed to advance northeast of Nesteryanka along the forest patch, capturing it and moving towards the settlement of Oryhiv from the southern direction. This advance was geolocated with this footage here, confirming the Russian advance. Moving on to the Kurakhove direction, the Russians have advanced within the central parts and western parts of it, where they've managed to advance along the bridge between Novyi and Kurakhove, to gain further control of the industrial area along the reservoir. At the same time, they've captured significant portions of the apartment complex area, gaining control over the majority of it, leaving only a small part in a gray zone, as well as additional apartment complex buildings as the hospital, school, and general areas here in the forest part of the city. Following that, it is only the industrial zone remaining. This means that the majority of Kurakhove is now under Russian control. The remaining parts is mostly industrial, which the Ukrainians are planning to hold up in. This is to prevent a fast breakthrough of the Russians, but it will also likely end up in an encirclement of their forces unless they withdraw. And this will lead to a Russian push towards Dashne from the north, Yantarne from the south, which would cut off any supply lines in and out of the Ukrainian positions in and near Kurakhove. In the Pokrovsk direction, there's a small advance by the Russians here to the south of Tashenske, where they are gaining a foothold within the settlement to gain control over the southern bank of the Novyi River line. This will allow the Russians to develop offensive operations along the southern bank to gain full control over Troshenya and Lysivka in the east. This will also allow them to cross over towards Selene and move further along the fortified positions of the Ukrainians in the first line of defense south of Pokrovsk. Moving on to the Toretsk direction, the Russians have advanced north of the waist heap west of the industrial zone, gaining full control over yet another district within Toretsk to push onwards along the railways that moves through the industrial zone. The Russians continue their offensive operations within Toretsk to gain full control over the city, with control of the industrial zone, the apartment complex area, and the hills here to the south of Toretsk. The Russians have gained a significant advantage within the city and will likely continue offensive operations. This advance by the Russians is located with this footage here, confirming the Russian advance. Moving on to the Oskil River line, there are several developments here. The Russians have captured the settlement of Losova. They have flanked Zeleny High from the north, moving towards the fortified positions of the Ukrainians near Borovska and Rivka and Zeleny High as they move through the northern forest lines. With this, the Russians have made significant progress around Losova and beyond the first line of defense of the Ukrainians north of Borova, where the Russians are looking to flank the fortified positions facing in a northern direction towards Kurakhove and Zenkove from the eastern direction, flanking it from their vulnerable parts to move towards Novoplatonivka and gain control over the first line of defense in the northern direction. This would also allow them to flank their fortified positions in the eastern direction, gain control over the first line of defense and pushing the Ukrainians to the second line of defense, surrounding Borova all around the settlement from the three directions. In the Kupiansk direction, the Ukrainians managed to recapture the first patch here in the direction of Goslenikivka and pushing the Russians further back from Hlushkivka. With this, the Ukrainian forces are securing an important defensive choke point for them. The Russians would have to either move through the first patch or the singular road that is out exposed into the open, while the Ukrainians now, with the recapture of the first patch and this road, prevents further offensive operations by the Russians in this direction. The Russians were previously fighting in the first patch and gained control of it. However, the Ukrainians, combined with infantry and FPV drones, managed to push the Russians back out of the first patch. With this, we see heavy fighting in the direction of Lishkivka and Boliznikivka. Further north, the Russians have advanced further across the Oskil River line, expanding their foothold across it and fighting in the direction of Dvorishne from the south, as well as Kalinove from the north, expanding their zone of control along the first patches in the direction of Zapatna as well. This is to gain a proper foothold across the river line and secure some sort of positions here to hit the connection between Dvorishne and Kurakhove further to the south and gain control over an important supply hub for Ukrainian positions on the western bank of the Oskil River line. Gaining control of it will allow the Russians to expand offensive operations in the western bank of the Oskil River line. However, so far there's no indication that a larger force is being gathered in this direction. Instead, the main push is seemingly in the direction of Borova, here further to the south. Moving on to the Kursk direction, the Russians have made several advances. They've managed to reach and gain a foothold within Rusko-Poreshnoe and have managed to resecure the settlements of Nechaev and Nizhnaya Parovaya. According to Deep State Map and several Ukrainian sources, there's been first reported combat of North Korean soldiers in the Kursk region. They base it off of an image where a lot of infantry is moving through a field. No one can, with any sincerity, claim that that is North Korean soldiers, because there's simply not enough pixels to confirm any such claim. They likely base it off of the fact that a lot of soldiers are combined in one area and not a lot of spacing and so on. which shows a complete disregard for the lessons learned in the Russo-Ukrainian war. But you've also seen such cases based on poor command or new units with no combat experience that simply are not properly training their units. It could also simply be corruption, which we have seen plenty of. So in either case, there's no confirmation that there are North Korean soldiers fighting in the Kursk region, but if there are, it is likely that this is the case with these soldiers, but it is not guaranteed as there's no evidence yet, despite the claims happening over a month ago. Now, taking a look at the whole front line, we see that the Russians are developing offensive operations everywhere really, except for the Kharkiv region, where the Russians are developing offensive operations in the Kursk region, along the Oskil River line and the Serbets River line, in the direction of Toretsk, Chasiv Yar, Pokrovsk, Kurakhove, Velika Novoselka, and even in the Zaporizhia region. So they have offensive operations everywhere. The Ukrainians do some localized counterattacks, but there are also reports of a new grouping of forces in the Chernihiv region, which has a new insignia, a square, which could indicate offensive operations taking place either in the northern parts of the Kursk region or in the Chernihiv region being planned by the Ukrainians, or it could simply also be a distraction to relocate Russian forces from other sections of the front line, despite there not being any offensive operations. So it could be an information warfare tool, or it could be a genuine offensive being prepared. In either case, it is something that would benefit the Russians in the southern section of the front line if Ukrainian forces are redirected elsewhere. And yet again, it would simply be a repeat of the Kursk incursion with initial success on the Ukrainian side, followed up with slow reorganization of Russian forces, mostly new and units that have little combat experience, fighting the initial Ukrainian push until the front line is organized. And similarly, it will be a distraction of Ukrainian forces from other sections of the front line to the northern direction, where the Russians will simply continue their offensive operations in the south to gain control over their Donetsk region. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.